another meeting that's sometimes at the exact same time. So,
Yeah.
like, cool, I can come like twice this year. That's great. So, try to
Yeah.
be here those 2 days, but yeah,
It's always so hard with collaborative meetings
I
because
know, and it is, yeah,
yeah, the folks that are like focused on collaboration usually have more collaborative meetings and are pretty busy.
totally. Yep.
Yeah.
Can you guys hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Okay. I'm
Yeah,
getting my
just
headphones working, so it might be better in a second.
okay. Yeah, no problem.
Thank you. I don't know. I don't know what's wrong with sometimes they connect automatically and sometimes I have to go through a bunch of steps.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm sure we're gonna have a couple of people trickling in. Joseph, if you want to share the PowerPoint, I'll start the recording. Actually, it looks like the recording's already going. Thanks.
Let me share my screen.
Oh, one moment, Jessica, we'll just do a brief introduction and then
Okay,
we'll switch it over to you. Sorry, I was talking to
sounds good.
Joseph. Yeah. So I'll start there. All right. Well, welcome to the March Mobility and Access Coalition meeting. So we have a wonderful training today. Next slide. So I know that we're all like pros at Zoom by now, but just we're going to go over a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. Next slide. Just so you know that you should have gotten a response to where you could have joined via browser or with the app. Next slide. And then there's also a one-click phone number that you can click on to join if you lose internet connection. Next slide. And then I just wanted to let everybody know that we are recording this meeting. We'll post it on our YouTube channel so that people can go back and watch it or share it if you people weren't able to join us. You can click on the participants to see who else is in the meeting. At this point, if you could enter your name and your organization in the meeting or in the chat, that would be great. We just ask that people mute themselves unless they're speaking. And if you are speaking, it helps if you use video just for some visual communications. Next slide. And if you need closed captioning, you can go ahead and turn those on by clicking the More button and then selecting the show caption up at the top of that pop-up window. And so if you want to be able to read along with that, that'd be great. Next slide. So just a reminder that the Mobility and Access Coalition is a coalition of nonprofit organizations, government programs, planners, transportation providers that focus on transportation equity as being essential to accessing all other aspects of our lives. We believe that transportation is essential to accessing opportunity, having a good quality of life, and meeting your basic needs. So through multimodal transportation, we're trying to help people be thriving and safe in their transportation choices. Next slide. And we have a really brief agenda today because we have some wonderful training that we're going to be going through, but we just have one update that we'll go through and then we'll transition to the de-escalation training. Next slide. So Sarah, would you like to give an update about the RTD Live drop-in event?
Yeah, sure, Angel. Yeah, so there is an RTD Live application kind of help option tomorrow for a drop-in event at the Center for People with Disabilities in Longmont. And that event is scheduled, it was originally scheduled for 10 to 12, but they changed it just a little bit, so it's now 9:30 until 11:30. So if you saw 10 to 12 before, just note in your brain, it's now 9:30 to 11:30. But you won't have to stay the whole time. It's just a drop-in event. If you have any questions about RTD Live, or if you are somebody that wants to apply for the service, or if you have like just any really questions about Access-a-Ride or Access on Demand, you are totally welcome to drop by tomorrow. I'll be there, and then there'll be 2 Denver Human Services staff members, and then there'll be 1 RTD staff member, Valerie. So this is our second event. And then our first one was in Boulder. It went pretty smooth. It was the last month. So yeah, come join us.
Great, thank you, Sarah. And Joseph, I just
Yeah.
want to let you know that you're showing the presenter side of the presentation at this point. If you want to go ahead and minimize that. So Sarah, do you want to talk about a little bit about like why we switched from a workshop to a drop-in event?
Yeah, sure. So for a workshop, we were thinking that like people would want to join, feel more comfortable joining the event if it was more of like a drop-in event, because I think that doing a full workshop was a little bit intimidating to some people, and like dropping in for the full 2 hours was kind of intimidating. Was that what you were thinking, Angel?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Okay,
Cool.
So I'm going to go ahead and share in the chat the link to the Lunch and Learn.
Oh,
So
thank
if you help the people that you serve with transportation options, you can watch that, and it will talk about the program and how you can help people sign up. And it has contact information for a lot of the Denver Human Services folks that help administer it. And just a reminder that we're trying to promote this to people so that they will sign up for the Low Income Pass program. A lot of people who have disabilities, they get free passes or passes from INA, Avenues, or Imagine,
Mhm.
and they didn't sign up for the Low Income Pass program until now. But now that Access on Demand charges up front, we're just trying to raise awareness that people can get that cut in half. So I will go ahead and share the Lunch and Learn for RTD Live, and we will. Does anybody have any questions about that?
Should I share that link, Angel, for the I know it's on the screen, but it's the boco.org/RTD-live-workshop CPD or CPWD Longmont.
Yeah, that would be great.
But I can also put that in the chat.
Yeah, that would be great.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
Great, thank you. You can go ahead and go to the next slide, Joseph. Okay, so we're going to transition to the training at this point. So I just wanted to introduce Jessica with our CAT team. Hi, Jessica. I don't know. So our CAT team is a community assistance and treatment team, and they conducted a wonderful de-escalation training for our community planning and permitting probably about 6 months ago now. So you all had expressed interest in learning more techniques around de-escalation. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Jessica. Joseph, if you'd like to stop sharing your screen. Thank you.
Thank you. So first, let me start by sharing my presentation. Can you all see it now? We'll try to.
It's still loading, but it looks like yep, now we can see it.
It's good?
Mhm.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, thank you so much for having me. We're going to talk a little bit about de-escalation techniques, and just as a very quick introduction on myself, my name is Jessica Jaramillo, and I am the program manager and clinical supervisor for the CAT team, which I'll share a little bit about the end so you all know what we do and what services we can provide, as well as our sister team, WellMind Connection, since we've kind of like fused into one. So I'll share about that once we're done. Also, I'll try to go a little bit fast just because I usually take like 2 hours to do this training. With that said, please feel free to, at any point that you need, just interrupt me, like ask questions. I cannot see you all right now since I have the presentation open. So just jump in with anything that you would like to clarify. So we don't have to wait until the end, and that way we can also make it a little bit more interactive. So yeah, let's get into our material. So this is like a quick agenda on the topics that we'll be talking about today, trying to cover up all the main points of how to practice de-escalation, how to recognize it, how to practice safety, and hopefully do a little bit of role playing at the end. So we have the opportunity to put these skills that we've acquired into practice. So why this matters? The reality is that in the service industry, like as providers that most of us are, we can sometimes be the first point of contact or introduction into a system, an organization for someone. And what that means in terms of like the responsiveness and how we handle certain situations. We are also submerged a lot of times in high stress, time sensitive environments for us and for the people that we're serving. So in and of itself, the situation can already be tense, not by what we're putting in, just by how it naturally exists. And we are also supporting a lot of vulnerable populations. We are navigating their stress, their uncertainty, the barriers in the system. So things that already, like I said, are making the situation potentially difficult. Something that I do want to highlight here is that I want us to think about de-escalation not as something extra that needs to get done, not as like necessarily a burden, but more so an inherent part of what we do. Dealing with the stressors that sometimes exist in the community, exist in people, exist in the nature of our jobs. And right now we're hopefully putting a little bit of language as to what that means and why it happens, and structure into our responses of like how we can have a better response to these type of situations. So again, just thinking about for us getting into that mindset of what it means when we're the first person, maybe that someone interacts with in that day or within that system. What it means to have a powerful role within that introduction in either helping stabilize someone or unintentionally, because of course this is unintentional, escalating the situation. And just taking into account that most of us are already doing this to the best of our abilities, and we can always use an extra help, just a little more structure. So just some general like group agreements that we're all going to hold while we do this is remembering that none of us are perfect. We are here to learn, not to judge ourselves or to judge others about what we're doing, and taking what helps you. You don't have to accept everything that I say. You don't have to take it as truth. Just take what works for you and what you feel is applicable, remembering that this is always a judgment-free space. None of us are ever going to handle every situation perfectly, especially when emotions run high. And really, it's never about that perfection. It's just about having something tangible in difficult moments. That's all it is. Okay, so just as a warm-up, how would you describe in one word, you can drop it in the chat, a challenging interaction that you've had recently? It could be like what it makes you think, what it makes you feel, just kind of like for us to get a general idea of the experience that you are all having when this comes up. Exhausting, overwhelmed, anxious. Ooh, frozen, that's a good one. Anxious, defensive, cautious. Yeah. Angry, challenged. I love these. And I say that in the sense of like, it's giving us an image of how much emotion comes up for us as well, like naturally so. The difficulties that it brings in our own responses and in our own emotional regulation, which again is very, very understandable. And hopefully these are some of the things. Ooh, also guilty. I like that one. Defensive. Yeah. Okay, so hopefully we can tackle all of these. Like, hold on to that for a little bit just to see how we incorporate it into our self-regulation plan that we're going to be doing. Okay, so let's start with understanding escalation. Like, what does this mean when a person gets escalated? The first thing that we want to frame it as is that escalation is not bad behavior. This does not mean that someone is choosing to be difficult. No one I'm going to make a blanket statement here. No one ever chooses to be difficult for the fun of it. It is uncomfortable for all parties involved. What it means when someone escalates is that they've lost the ability to regulate themselves. It means that the demands of the environment exceed their capacity to cope. So some of us have very good coping skills. We have the privilege to have learned that maybe at home from our parents. Maybe we studied and put a lot of effort in going to therapy or reading books. Maybe it was through practice or having certain friends that were very good at regulation and we could learn from them. But emotional regulation is a skill. And there are a lot of reasons why sometimes we don't acquire those skills in life, and the environment exceeds sort of like that capacity that we have, that toolbox. It's not like big enough for us to effectively and successfully manage what is coming up. So we're going to frame it as a loss of emotional regulation and not bad behavior. This is the first like framework that we want to hold on to. And what this means for the brain is that when there's a lot of emotion, our rational thinking shuts down. This is true for all of us. So this is the difference kind of like in what they call quote unquote like upstairs brain, which is the thinking part, the logical part, the more analytical piece of ourselves. And then the downstairs brain, which is just like survival. This is automatic. We have no control over it. This is where we see reactions as like fight, freeze, things that are instinctual for what we deem in that moment survival. And survival can mean a lot of things. This is not necessarily physical. So survival can mean if we perceive like loss of safety, if we perceive a loss of resources, all of these things that we can equate to our own well-being, if they feel threatened, it can activate sort of like the survival state. So this is another piece that we want to hold on to for ourselves and for others, that the logical parts of the brain are getting shut down the higher the emotion is. And we go into survival mode, not logic. So why do people suddenly like fall into these states? We'll see that most escalation comes from like these three core experiences. There's more, but generally they fall into these categories. One, a person is feeling unsafe. And again, safety can mean a lot of things. It can be safety based on resources, like it can mean safety based on acceptance, feeling unheard and feeling out of control. We like control, we like predictability, we like to feel like we are not at the mercy or like demise of circumstances. And there's a lot of things sometimes that we can do if we perceive a lack of control, especially if that control historically has been threatened for a lot of other reasons in our lives. So if we can identify what of these things may be going on for another person and try to address it for them, that alone can help us de-escalate. A lot of de-escalation is not about saying the perfect thing or having the perfect words that you can share with another individual. It's more so how the other person is experiencing you. And are you making them feel like this sensation of like, I'm kind of in control of what's going on. I am feeling safe with you. And we can convey this in a lot of different ways that we'll go over that have nothing to do necessarily with what we're saying, but more so how we're making that other person feel and experience the situation. And the last piece that's important to note in this is that most escalation that we see is an automatic reaction and not a decision. People are not deciding in that moment, like, oof, I'm going to escalate this. I'm going to be very difficult. They are automatically reacting to the intensity of the emotions that they're feeling and the assumptions that they're making about what's going on in the moment. And this is all very, very subconscious. Okay, so before I go into a little bit of the trauma-informed work, I just want to pause for a second because I know I'm going kind of fast. Any thoughts or questions up until this point?
I guess one thought is even if we like rationally understand that people aren't choosing it, it's like hard to not have that personal reaction. I don't know. Like, I guess that's just my first thought.
Absolutely. Because we too are influenced by the environment. Like we're human and it's a reciprocal relationship. So it's both and. It doesn't mean that suddenly it absolves them of responsibility and then we need to tolerate everything and then we need to be perfectly fine. It's going to affect us. It's the same as saying, like, if someone physically punches you in that moment, you can't say, like, well, that did not hurt at all. You're going to feel the pain. It's more so understanding where did that come from. So holding for a little bit, like, why is this happening, where it comes from, and separating it if we can. Because again, sometimes we're going to be very overwhelmed with emotion and logic is going to go out the window. But to the extent that we can't, that we can, knowing that it is not necessarily personal and it is dictated by a lot of other things. So just a starting point in being like, okay, where can these behaviors come from? What does that mean for them? And at the same time, holding the fact that we're also human. Of course we're going to react. Of course we're going to feel a certain way. And we're going to get into that in a little bit because that's also a pretty important piece. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course.
And there's a comment in the chat from Melanie, and she said that she appreciates that frame to remember to ask yourself, where did that come from? Yeah, I think, yeah, that's great. I do
Yeah.
think that like once people get to us and are calling us about transportation, they've just like called so many folks or been like turned down so many times or it didn't work. Like just understanding that their frustration isn't because of us is like something that we try to like keep reminding ourselves.
Exactly, exactly. That's such a good way to put it. And Melanie, I love what you said because you just described trauma-informed care in a nutshell. Now, we're going to go into a little bit of it, just like scratching the surface, because I think it's a very important topic that relates to de-escalation. And what you're saying, Melanie, is exactly it. So for the framework of trauma-informed work, like I said, I don't want to go too much into detail because this could be a whole training in and of itself. I think it is important to kind of like review the main things because it gives us that perspective and that understanding of like where behaviors come from and behaviors that sometimes may be hard to make sense of given the situation and what we're seeing and the reactivity or like yeah, just kind of like having an understanding of what sometimes makes people behave the way that they do. And the other part of trauma-informed care is having the awareness that to a certain extent, it is a responsibility as providers to respond in a way that accounts for trauma and realizing that in the world that we live in, most people come with a certain degree of trauma and a certain baggage that they may not be aware of. So again, this is not necessarily the solution. This is just kind of like a preface to understanding. So trauma-informed lens, these are just some important things to take into account. People carry past experiences into present moment. This is true for absolutely all of us. We do not react to the present. We think we do, but we react to what we know based on what we have experienced before. And the learning and the understanding that we have from that past moment, we make decisions and analysis based on that in the present moment. So what do I mean by this? A very, very typical example is if like, let's say that when you were growing up, every time your mom called your name was because you were in trouble. It was never a positive thing. Like if she was like, Jessica, come here, I did something wrong and I was in trouble. Now as an adult, if maybe that is something that I have not necessarily thought about or brought to my kind of like consciousness, then I'm going to have an automatic anxious reaction when someone says, Jessica, we need to talk. that in and of itself doesn't mean anything. Yet it creates a response based on my past experience that when someone wants to talk to me, it's usually nothing good. And they are either going to be upset at me, angry at me, they're going to tell me that I did something wrong. So I am already walking into the conversation with a certain level of anxiety, with a certain level of maybe even defensiveness, whatever it may be. So now put this into a wide lens for every situation that we are experiencing. It is kind of like the same thing. We are filtering it through past moments. And if those past moments are not positive in a way, then you can understand how the reactions that we're coming into already can be difficult from the get-go. Another one to think about is that because of this, reactions may be bigger than the situation, and it's not about what's happening. The reaction is tied to something else. Just being aware that what we're seeing is not necessarily caused by what is going on in the moment. Our job is not to judge. So this is a big piece of trauma-informed lens. I think naturally so, it's easy to be like, why is this person being so difficult? Why are they reacting this way? Like all of these judgments that go into our head because for us the reaction doesn't fit the situation. We don't know. That's the reality. We don't know why they're reacting that way. So it's best just to hold that judgment and just acknowledge that we may not understand the full picture of the reaction. So again, just from trauma-informed lens, and this is what you were saying, which I was like, you're so spot on. One of the shifts in focus that we want to do internally, not for the clients, but for ourselves, instead of thinking the judgment piece of like, what is wrong with you? Which is, again, kind of like a common thought that would pop up if we see someone reacting in a difficult way. Trying to shift that to what has happened to you, like a curiosity of what has happened to this person that this makes them so upset, or what might they be experiencing right now. And these allow us to stand from a point of more curiosity and this commitment to support versus like this judgmental space that makes it harder for us as well when we're thinking like, what in the world is wrong with you? So we're just trying to understand their experience, even though we don't have necessarily the answers to that. Another important thing to mention in kind of like this trauma-informed lens, there's something called rational detachment. I don't want to go too much into the details, but it's something that for us, it allows us to keep a little bit of our emotional control. This is not even so much for the people we're servicing, but for ourselves. And it's this acknowledgement that negative behaviors, comments, or actions are not personal. They rarely are, and they have nothing to do with us. So internalizing them makes it harder to control our emotions because it feels personal. If someone is screaming in my face, then it's easy to make it a thing about me and maybe their anger being directed towards me and thinking like, well, I need to defend myself right now. And that emotional rises within myself. It makes the situation more complicated versus flipping the script and thinking they're not angry at me. Like, we don't know them. They don't know us. We've maybe just exchanged a couple of words. They have maybe accumulated anger, which is exactly what we were talking at first about the system. They have accumulated frustration about not being in control, not being so like externalizing it and knowing that it is never about us, the comments, the actions. And that can help us keep ourselves like centered in that moment without getting dragged into that reactivity. So this is a little bit of the framework of communication. This is not going to be the basis of our response, just for you to be aware of what like trauma-informed care could look like. The first piece is self-awareness and self-regulation, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Responding with empathy. understanding where someone else is coming from to the extent that you can. Attunement, so you're listening to understand, not to respond, realizing that everyone comes with their own uniqueness in a way. And then responsiveness in a way that shows that you care and that you are trying to the best of your ability to respond to that person's needs. Something to take into account also when we talk specifically about trauma-informed care is keeping in mind that just from the position that we stand, there's a certain power and privilege when we are perceived as being the holders of resources or power. Whether this is true or not, the perception of that power is still at play. So a few things just to consider, that there could be this dynamic where we are coming from a privileged stance in those resources and what it feels for maybe the other person to not have that empowerment, to not feel like they have that access. Being aware of it and just how it may be playing in the interaction, and knowing that certain things can increase that power differential. And this extends if we are considering a lot of other things that could be at place, like the race of the person that we're talking to, like if it's a man with a woman or vice versa, if it's someone able-bodied and someone with a disability, like there's a lot of things that could be at play. And again, this is adding to what we may be seeing play out. So this is a little bit of what I was mentioning. So things that could impact is perceived power, perceived vulnerability. And I emphasize the word perceived because it may not necessarily be there, and it will still play a part if it is perceived like that. So perceived vulnerability, perceived control over the outcomes, gender, culture, membership in a non-dominant group, dynamics, etc. And just a few things that we can do to wrap up this trauma, sort of like this trauma-informed lens. These are, if we do realize that, oof, I think this power dynamic may be at play and a person is feeling very vulnerable, a person is feeling this lack of control. These are just some little things that can level the playing field, where we can allow the others that sense of control and decrease or increase the feeling of empowerment and independence. So things like asking permission just to do anything, like anything that we want to ask the other person, just asking permission first. It provides that sense of independence, that sense of control. Being intentional about situational factors that can feel a person feel more comfortable. So things that we may not take into consideration that may play a part for them in the environment. So being very intentional about noticing that, introducing yourself, your pronouns, like things like that, your role, without the other person having to necessarily ask or make assumptions. It's a sense of provides a sense of safety, asking what their thoughts are rather than directly telling them what they have to do, getting sort of like their feedback first. In advance, only if it's applicable, if you already know something about that person because they've already done it before and it's in their file, or they've already talked about it with a coworker, doing our due diligence behind the scenes so that it demonstrates the investment in help that we have in helping them. So reviewing whatever notes or whatever is relevant to their case, if we do have access to that. Again, showing respect for, basic things like name, title, pronouns. And this is another small one, but not necessarily prolonging wait any longer than they have to be. Okay, so little quiz, very easy. Which ones of these are true and which ones are false? You can either write it in the chat or say it out loud, whatever's easiest.
Would
Okay.
you be able to read them? I think that
Yeah.
the contrast is a little light.
Oh, yeah. So A says the behaviors of the service provider have no effect on the individual's emotional state. B is service providers' behaviors and attitudes can escalate or de-escalate an individual's emotional state depending on their approach. And C is the individual's behavior is entirely dependent. In this case, I put mobile crisis because that's what we do, but like obviously it could be anyone on the provider's actions.
False A, B true,
Mhm. Yes.
C. See, false. It's not entirely.
Tell me your thought process.
The A, we do have an impact that you said earlier, when
Mhm.
working with somebody, and our own emotional state as we work with that person can impact how that conversation goes and how it flows when we're working with somebody. As B was saying a moment ago, we have the ability to escalate or de-escalate the situation depending on our approach. Now, the reason why I said C was a little tricky was because it says entirely
Mhm.
independent, and I was like, well, that's a setup word right there. Entirely is a little tricky.
Yes. You all got it right. I love it. You're all paying attention. Yes, you're absolutely right. B is the correct one, like everyone said in the chat. A and C are false because it's not either extreme. It's not that we don't have any effect on their emotional state. It's also not true that it's entirely dependent on our actions. It is a combination of both. So it means we can, to a certain degree, influence the emotional state depending on how we're approaching it. And it's going to be a multitude of factors. So you are all right. So here's a question to think about. And if you all, if anyone feels comfortable sharing or writing down some of your thoughts, or if you want to reflect on it on your own, that's perfectly fine too. But for ourselves, a time when we have felt overwhelmed or reactive, a time when we even maybe have lost it a little bit with honestly, I have this example of myself in mind where I once was in a call with Amazon and I lost it. And I say this as a therapist. I've been doing this like almost 20 years now. I lost it. And reflecting back in that moment of like, wow, that poor soul, I just exploded on them. What did I need in that moment? What was missing for me that they were not necessarily, that I didn't feel like they were giving me? So someone said acknowledgement. Yes, I love that. If you can't step away, yes, space and time. Yep, yep. So some distance, some clarity. If I look back at my own example again, thinking this time that I blew up on that poor Amazon like on the call line, I think I needed to feel heard. It felt like I was talking to a machine with scripted responses. So like he wasn't empathizing with my situation and the frustration of my situation and just giving me these very like repetitive, like I did not feel like he was hearing me. So my emotional state started escalating me because I wanted to feel heard. I wanted to feel like he was understanding my problem so that maybe we could do something about it. And instead it was just like talking to like like it felt like a machine. Rest, time to decompress. Yes. Perfect. So yeah, just some food for thought. If we put ourselves in those moments, which we're human, so I'm sure we've all lost our cool at one moment. Really thinking about what would have helped, what was missing, what did we need from that interaction that we were not getting? And it's on both sides, like things that we could have done for ourselves and things that we also wanted from the other party that we were not getting. So let's go now into the de-escalation piece. Recognizing early warning signs, because it is a process. It is not, and it feels like an on and off switch sometimes, yet like the name suggests, it's like a ladder. It starts building up until we see a moment of crisis. And what I want you all to kind of like start thinking as we go through recognizing these signs is how early can we stop it? The earlier, the more function that we have in that higher thinking brain, the more that we can access problem solving and logic. If the escalation is already too high, the harder it gets to control that situation. So again, escalation, it is a process. It happens in stages. The early signs matter because if we can recognize them, we can intervene. And we don't have to let it build up to the point where it's harder to bring a person down from that state. So this is just a very simple model that we sometimes use in crisis to understand where a person is in the continuum. You'll see the first stage is just baseline. It's everyone's normal, and some people's normal may be more tense than others, and it's still their baseline. It's still like for them the place where they normally exist. So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're agitated. And the reason why I say this is because if you have someone in your life, friend, family, whoever, that maybe is a slightly more anxious person or more tense or has a way of speaking that is more direct, more crass, it may be interpreted as they're already agitated, and not necessarily. That's just their baseline. They're experiencing themselves as they usually are. It doesn't mean that they're at an escalated level. So then there's the activation, which I'm gonna break all of these down so we can understand them a little bit better. Agitation, escalation, and then full-blown crisis moment, which is the part that we don't want to get to. And here's kind of like a little image of how this looks. The peak would be the crisis, and then obviously there's like the de-escalation process and the recovery if it gets to that point, but hopefully we want to stop it before that. So these are some like general, very, very, very general signs. One is if we start hearing a person repeating themselves, it can already kind of like indicate that frustration. If they said something and they kind of like say it again the same way. The raised voice is very obvious if like their tone starts going up. And this is one that is often not talked about, but if someone suddenly goes silent or withdraws, like they're engaged and then suddenly like they don't talk anymore, that is a sign of escalation that we may not be picking up as obviously, but it means that the person is already building up on that frustration that they're experiencing. So some examples of what this kind of like look like, if they are asking repeated questions that we already answered. This could be about scheduling or timing. And you kind of think like, I literally just answered this question. The intent behind it is not necessarily that they're not getting the answer. It's that they're not hearing what they want to hear. We have to figure out where kind of like that frustration lies, because what someone is communicating, not everyone is the best communicator and not everyone is full of self-awareness. It would be fantastic if we lived in a world where that was true. Unfortunately, it's not. So it may be that we are hearing it in the way of like, you already asked me this. Yet what is behind that question is something else. There is like some other frustration behind that. It's not because they haven't received the answer. So like repeated questioning, we already said raised voice. If you're in person, if you start noticing a certain like restlessness or like pacing or like a little bit of more like abrupt movements, fidgety, things like that, this is obvious. Like if they start talking about the system, if they start expressing frustration about the barriers, and the last one that I did say, like withdrawal, that often gets missed. Just to get an idea of where you all are at, what do you observe the most? And it doesn't necessarily have to be these that I mentioned. If you can just like type it in the chat, what have you noticed as a sign of escalation? And I see someone raising their hand. Is that me? I don't know if I clicked on something. I'm sorry. Is someone raising their hand?
I think that's you, Jessica.
Oh my God, I'm sorry. I
That's
didn't even know
all
how I did that. Sorry.
Yeah.
But yeah. So what would you say are like some of the examples that you all have seen in your line of work? Ooh, body language. Yameli, tell me more. Like, what lets you know that their body language has changed? What's different?
Yeah, so sometimes you can tell, when they're relaxed or laid
Mhm.
back. And then once they start feeling tension or, it's escalating, their posture gets kind of big, tall and stiff. And I've seen some people start like kind of like shaking their legs or like fidgeting with their hands. Yeah, some things like that.
Yes, yes. So you start picking up on the tension. The body doesn't look relaxed anymore. It starts looking tense, and you also notice maybe kind of like that restlessness, that fidgety display. That's good. Angel is saying talking without giving, yeah. So without giving people a chance to respond. So they start talking all over you, like they're not even at the point where they want to hear you. Now they're just like venting and expressing their anger. Sarah says, I've experienced similar people retreat, are silent, or people aren't getting their questions answered, so they repeat it. Yes. They become silent, or they just start like repeating it all over again because they don't feel like they're getting what they need. Yeah. So again, like a big piece of the de-escalation work, try to pick up before it goes up, before it's a full-blown crisis, because that's where we want to intervene. If you notice a shift in their body language, they started getting tense, something's going on. Let me try to figure out before it gets worse or before I inadvertently escalate it more. So let's start with the calm. So if we look back, we're going to go one by one and kind of like talk a little bit about it. So the first one is their baseline. This is like our job here is just to keep the calm, keep them in that state with supportive interactions. And you can do this by using validating nonverbal cues like nodding, open body posture. So reassuring that you are listening, that you're not distracted, you're paying attention, you're engaged, you're responsive, just the basic. I mean, most people will most likely, hopefully, be in this state when they come in or they engage with you initially. The next one is when they start activating. So this is like the trigger that a lot of the times can be imperceptible. You won't notice that it happens. And that makes sense because what is a trigger for others may not be a trigger for you. So something that could be very neutral for you. I mean, we're a crisis team, so I can give you like examples of things that sometimes my team is like, I don't even know what happened, and this person lost it. And when you talk to them, it was maybe a word like, I don't know, you said, I'm trying to think of anything specific if it comes to mind. Oh, I remember that one person. Okay, I have one example. This was way back when, like a couple of years back, there was a fire. Long story short, a person was in crisis because of what had happened in their neighborhood. And one of my team members was working with this person, and they mentioned like, yeah, in this state of crisis, this can be so hard for you. And the reaction was so swift. They were like, what do you mean crisis? I'm not in crisis. Now, objectively speaking, it was a crisis. Now, for whatever experiences or understanding this person had of the word, that was an activation point. If we don't de-escalate in that moment, it only goes up because they've already entered in a negative state of mind where they are maybe whatever came up for them around the word, it's getting activated. So again, you may not know what the trigger is. Just know that this is a state where you notice kind of like that shift, where they may tell you. In this case that I'm talking about, I remember the person did say immediately was like, why are you saying crisis? I'm not in crisis. So this is your note to backtrack and kind of like repair, which we're going to talk about how to do. So your job at this point is identify if you can what happened and immediately minimize the impact, because it can go south quickly from here. And the thing that I want us to take into account is that the content, there's a very big difference when we talk about therapy in what we see in people sometimes when they are fighting or in an emotional state. There is the content of the fight or the content of the frustration, the emotion, which is basically the literal aspect to it. I am angry because you said crisis. That is surface level. That is what it looks like on paper. Behind that, there is the process. The process is more so what is the meaning of that for you? Why did that bother you? Why it's, and why may be a judgmental word, but understanding what is the person experiencing around the word. The problem wasn't saying the word, the problem is the experience and how it is being felt. So when we talk about identifying the activation, I'm not talking so much about problem solving, what you said or didn't say, but more so if we can identify the pieces behind it that are being onset. So we can ask clarifying questions like, oh, what happened? Again, I'm going to go back to using the crisis word, being like, I apologize. Let me reframe it. You can say like, I meant crisis in the sense of like, and provide a softer reinterpretation for them, because maybe that word is interpreted as like a very, I don't know, sometimes people have the perception of crisis that it means that someone is out of control and they don't like seeing themselves that way or something like that. Support them in identifying the activation. This is not like you're not going to be their therapist in that moment. You're just going to try to identify what's behind it and then get them into sort of like back of that logical space. Okay, the next piece, the next like step in our ladder would be the agitation. So this is where someone is already showing like visible signs. Maybe they're like scoffing. I don't know. Maybe they're like pacing, displaying like this frustration that is visible to the eye. Again, our goal, try to offer reassurance, address before it goes up. So here we can go into validation. We're going to talk about how to do validation in a little bit, but something like your feelings are understandable, they're valid given the situation. Is there anything that you need right now? You all mention right now in the chat that when you got agitated, what you needed was space. So if you think back to that, maybe like, do you want some space? I can come back in a few minutes, or we can talk in a little bit, or like, let's go for, like, if possible, the circumstances are going to vary, but like, let's get some fresh air outside, changing the scenery from that tense moment from wherever you may be. Or I really want to help you. Can we just like slow down, break this down to see like where we're missing each other? Then here comes the escalation. So at this stage is where things intensify and people start showing hostility. This is not just that you're seeing them visibly frustrated. Now they're being hostile against you. This is where they start like raising their voices. This is where they start like blaming you for what's happening, or they start demanding a response. I don't want to, the goals we're going to talk about more, but just so you get an idea, this is like a lot of like active listening. We need to remain calm. A lot of the work that we're going to do is in our own self-regulation, because like you all said at the beginning, we are not immune. We are like a system of like feedback loops with other individuals. So I put something out, it impacts another person, then they put something in response and it impacts me. And it is inevitable to have sort of like that ongoing cycle. What we want is to be aware of that and how we can keep ourselves anchored, which we're going to talk about in a little bit, and using non-confrontational approaches. So these are like some examples. In this part where they are already escalated, we can use more directive stances, because again, this is already like reaching a point of crisis, so we can be more directive, very calm. Being directive doesn't mean that we are using a harsh tone or that we are also being emotional, just like more like, I need you to sit down right now, I need you to take a seat, things like that. And then this is a crisis. At this point, you're best likely calling us, which I'll give you the information at the end, like please reach out to us, or calling 911 for co-responders or things like that, because this is when people, if they've reached this state, they're probably just acting out on their emotion, they're aggressive, they are most likely engaging in unacceptable behavior, and it's also not about tolerating abuse. There is a boundary, there is a line. So if it's reached the point of crisis, reach out for help. Like, don't feel like this is something that you still need to handle on your own. Okay, so the main role in these stages is try, if you can, during the activation stage, which is, this is like the trigger point, if you can identify when things shift slightly. A lot of interventions happen at the peak stage. This is when people, like, when someone is already like hurling insults or completely like frustrated and maybe throwing things on the floor, and that's when people try to intervene. Most likely in that stage their brain is shut down, like they are in a survival mode, and it gets much harder to try to reason with someone when they get to that point. So the mindset is always like, if you notice that activation, that trigger, that slight shift, oof, it's time for the escalation skills. It's time for those, which we're going to go into right now. Gonna pause for a few seconds. Thoughts so far? I keep putting my hand up. I don't know how I'm doing this. I'm sorry.
Jessica, you might talk about this in the de-escalation skills, but and you mentioned like calm tone, when
Yeah.
we reach those stages of talking to people in challenging situations. Are you going to share more guidance on like how to practice that tone or like where to keep it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we'll go into that. But yes, that's a good point, because we want to break down what those skills look like. So right now we're thinking like, what is the pattern of escalating? Like, can I identify where they are? And then our next task is like, so what do we do when we see this going up? And like you said, Nick, just learning to recognize our own tone of voice and like how we can modulate that in a way that doesn't make it worse. I'm also seeing a lot of good things in the chat, like Jamie said, I'm being discriminated against when it's not relevant. This is a good one, in the sense of like so linked to what we said before in trauma informed care. So in this piece, I think it's important to understand that the reactivity is coming from, like, when someone is saying this, it probably means that they have been discriminated. They're carrying already that lens of like, the world maybe does not accept me, or the world will treat me differently because of this. They have that baggage of repeated experiences of discrimination where everything is filtered. It can get to the point, again, because of the repeated trauma, to no fault of their own, to the point where every interaction that is slightly difficult can be linked in their experience to being discriminated against. If we know that, it doesn't mean that we're agreeing with them, because we may very well recognize this has nothing to, maybe these are just the rules. No one is discriminating against you specifically. It may be that you're coming from the stance where, like, I promise you these are the rules. Now, if we shift that and we think about, for this person, this is making them reactive because it's probably causing a lot of pain. It's probably bringing up that trauma of like, I am never going to be able to get anything because the world keeps discriminating against me. The question for us would be like, how do we address it in a way, if we take that as their truth, even though it may not be, how can we address it in a way where we acknowledge that it may feel like discrimination and we make them feel supported so that it's not necessarily perceived like that? The first piece, and again, we're going to touch more on this in the skills, we need to validate their experience. So this doesn't mean agree. This doesn't mean, there's a difference in saying like, yes, you're right, you're being discriminated against, because that may not be true, versus acknowledging that to them this may feel like discrimination because X, Y, and Z. Because it's understandable how they may see it from this lens. Connecting in empathy through what they've lived through that may have nothing to do with this situation. When we establish sort of like that validation, that they feel heard and understood, then we can move on a little bit into more solution focus of like, how can we address this problem while acknowledging that certain pieces may feel discriminatory. So you're kind of like holding their belief here of like saying like, I hear you, I see it, I understand where it's coming from, and like these other pieces. And Jamie, I love this one, so I want you to like hold it in your head. So at the end, when we're doing role playing, maybe we can use this example because I think it's a good one once we have more tools under our belt. Where is the red when you're on the phone? It's so hard over. Jamie, where's the red line when you're over the phone? This is also a good one. I think it's a little bit hard to like be specific in what is a hard stop. But there is a general line in the difference of like, we are not here to tolerate like abuse. Like if someone goes into being very verbally aggressive towards me, insulting me, saying maybe insults, slurs, whatever it may be, when it goes into that, that's a hard stop. You're absolutely okay to say like, I cannot continue the situation, this conversation, I'm sorry. I want to help you out and let's talk when we are able to more, whatever it is, you can hang up the phone at that time. Like there is a period, there is a line where it goes into like that more of like direct aggression. The distinction that it's important to make is like someone being angry and someone being dysregulated does not equal aggression towards us. And I think this is the piece where a lot of people get kind of like lost because it can be hard to weed apart. A person can be screaming in anger. A person can be cursing out the system, life, their mothers, whatever it may be. And that anger doesn't necessarily mean they're being aggressive. The emotion of anger and the expression of aggression are two different things. When we notice sort of like that crossover, if it's physical, like in person, if a person literally starts getting like physically like banging on things or that unacceptable, like we need to call someone else, like you need to get off the premise, whatever it may be. If it's over the phone, when a person directly starts attacking us, like it's not general, it's not anger, it's a direct attack, we can place that boundary because we're obviously like not here to endure abuse, and we can absolutely let them know that we need to hang up the phone and we can have that conversation later when they're ready. Yeah, of course. Sorry, I'm reading the comments and I'm like, yeah, for all of those that are leaving, hopefully you can catch on like the recording later and see some of the skills that we're going to go over. So let's talk about the de-escalation skills and yeah, what these are. Sorry, something happened to my screen and I can't see my presentation anymore. Sorry, I'm going to stop sharing for a second. I don't know what I did. I think you
Oh.
can all tell by this point that I'm not the best with Zoom and technology, but I'll share it again in a second. I'm gonna restart it. Okay, let's see. Hopefully you can all still see it.
It's coming up, it's loading. Yep, we can see it now. Thank you.
Okay, yay, thanks. Okay. So like we said, when we talk about de-escalation skills, first thing to take in mind is that behavior influences behavior. And this is important because the very first step, a core skill, is our own self-regulation. Our own emotional state, and others' emotional state, is going to be inevitably like a reflection of the environment and the interactions. This is true for the other person and for myself. So what we need to understand is how we are contributing to this, maybe in ways that we don't even realize. Like, we ourselves are getting tense, our tone of voice is changing, our the way that we're looking at the other person. I don't know, like some people, like we may not be aware that our expressions shift slightly. So that self-awareness is going to be crucial. Just as an example, let's say that you are with a group of friends, and this is a new group of friends, so you are trying to gauge how to relate to them, and you make a joke, just like one of your normal jokes. Think about how it would influence your future behavior if everyone laughs hysterically and they're like, "Oh my God, you're so funny." Most likely that immediately change your future behavior into you making more jokes, and you're gonna be more open about your thoughts or making comments. Now, if you made that joke and everyone was absolutely silent in that moment, that also automatically changed your demeanor or your behavior. It'll be less likely that you take that risk in the future. You're gonna be like, damn, tough crowd. You're probably not gonna want to try it again because you realize that that's not the type of humor, or your jokes didn't land, or you're gonna feel self-conscious about it. And that's a silly example, but that happens absolutely all the time. We shape each other's behaviors all the time with everyone that we interact with, and it could be like a server at the coffee shop or our partner at home. So the first thing, skill number one, is that we need to regulate ourselves. We are the nervous system that they borrow. And what this means is that most people co-regulate. We are like a form of like symbiotic system that the more another person escalates, it escalates the other. And if one de-escalates, it de-escalates the other. So if at least one person in the room can be aware of that and regulate their own nervous system, you have a better chance of bringing the other person down. It's a lot harder to be angry and out of control when the other person is presenting much softer and calmer. But if the other person is meeting you in your anger, you are both going to skyrocket into the moon. So co-regulation is pretty important. Tips to self-regulate. This is I think part of what I forgot, someone was asking about this a little couple minutes ago. So the tone and the speech, the nonverbal part of like what we're communicating, is very important. One of the things that we can do is, sorry that I have a typo here. It's not low your speech. That makes no sense. It's slow your speech. So slow your speech means when we're stressed out, we are going to speak faster. And we're going to try to get words in. And naturally, it's like we accelerate the way that we are conversing with the other person. If we can consciously be like, say words slow, like pace yourself, it's going to slow down the whole perception of the situation. So I mean, don't do it to like an extent where it sounds funny or like odd to the interaction, but do be aware if like you start going faster in the way that you speak. Same with like your tone. The more stressed you are, the higher your tone is going to go. The more like high pitched, the louder you're going to start speaking. And it's all about that awareness of like, okay, keep the tone low. This doesn't mean necessarily soft. Like, it's not like you're being condescending or like talking to a baby. It just means keep it. Notice if you start talking in a more like high pitched or the volume in your voice rises. Then body language. Your body will naturally start getting tense. Remember, we regulate each other's nervous system. If the other person starts getting dysregulated, they're dragging us down with them. It means we ourselves start getting dysregulated. You are going to start feeling some tension, even if you don't realize it. This means that suddenly maybe our shoulders rise a little bit. We are clenching our jaw without noticing it. Or we are like, our foreheads like start reflecting sort of like that disgruntled state. Notice the tension, let go of it. Practice this beforehand. A good trick is, we want to know what our body feels like when it's tense and not have to figure it out in the moment. So you can go through each body part and tense it just as a practice. This is like training your brain. And for example, tensing your hands and then being like, relax, and like unclenching your fists to notice what that difference feels like in your body. You can do it with your shoulders, like tense your shoulders, and then tell yourself like, relax, and put your shoulders down and feel that release of tension. Tense your face, and same thing, be like, relax. Your mouth, every part of your body. Practice when you're not in a tense situation to be very aware of like how it feels. It'll be much easier to do when you're in those moments versus having to figure it out. And then the other one, super important, create a small pause before responding. Give yourself time to think and process instead of automatically saying something. You're allowed to pause. You're allowed to say like, wait, I just give me a second just to give you the best response that I can, or to help you out the best way that I can. If we respond impulsively, it's going to come from a place of emotion more likely than a place of like processing and logical thinking. So give yourself that pause. These are other very, very general tools for regulating that I'm sure like most of you have heard about at some point. It helps to remember what they are. So grounding, it just means something in your environment that can bring you fully into the present moment and keep you there. This can mean a lot of things. So from, for example, noticing things in your environment very quickly, being like, you know what, I need to slow down because I'm getting, agitated with the situation. Obviously, this in your head. And you say, let me find 5 objects in the room that are black and square. And this grounds you in the moment. So we're not allowing for our own nervous system to get dysregulated. The other thing is orienting yourself to like where you are. And it's as simple as just like stating kind of like the place, the time, the moment, just a quick orientation. Movement, this could apply if you're over the phone and you have the ability to kind of like move your body. It helps you regulate. Any type of sensory stimulation, eat something spicy. I know this sounds weird, but if it like kind of like stimulates your senses, it helps a lot in keeping us grounded. Grab some ice, like if you're at home and you're with someone on the phone, go to the kitchen and hold a little bit of ice. It's going to shock you. If you want even a stronger sensation, I tell people like, drop it down your shirt. Let that shock happen in your system. It's going to kind of like bring you back to reality instead of like letting you run with the emotions. And the last one, and probably best one that I feel gets underestimated a lot is breathing. Breathing is tied to our nervous systems. If we can effectively slow down our breathing, we automatically slow down our nervous system. There is no way that they can be out of sync. So practice, there's a bunch of exercises online that you can find. The most important thing is that your breathing has to slow down. Agitation equals very fast breathing, and vice versa. So just some tools to keep in mind, because we need to be regulated first. So here's just like some other things to take into account. Like, this is a recap of everything that we've talked about, but it helps with our own regulation. The first is regulate yourself, understand activations, like understand that this has nothing to do with you. It's not personal. A lot of it stems from unresolved feelings of the other person, trauma, loss of power, experiences for them that are beyond what is currently happening. Remember to speak in a calm and steady tone, not fast, not loud. Avoid any body language that could be perceived as aggressive. This goes back to the tension in our own bodies that we may not realize is happening. Are we giving like a stank face? Do we have like clenched fists? Are we staring at this person? Are we too much in their personal space? Are we doing like very sudden, annoyed movements? And some, again, like nonverbal communication, maintain personal space, use non-threatening body language and gestures that can seem not even aggressive, but dismissive. Like sometimes rolling our eyes and not realizing it, or like, again, like sighing very loudly, things like that. Skill number 2, active listening and validation. And I'm gonna give you at the end, I can send it via email, like a small cheat sheet with all of these skills if you all want, just so that you can practice them, each of them. So, and have kind of like a recap. The first being like regulate yourself and your own nervous system. Second one, how do we practice active listening and validation? I feel like usually I see people struggling a lot with this one because it takes a little bit of practice at first to separate what it means to validate and what it means to agree with someone. And a lot of the times when someone is escalated, their escalation, like we said, doesn't stem necessarily from what's happening. So they're not being rational, and we don't have to agree with their thought process. We acknowledge their feelings, and there's a difference in that. So let's break it down. Things to avoid before we go in, like what it means to validate. This is like the things that we don't want to do. So I mean, it's kind of obvious, but on our own, avoid overreacting or like reacting impulsively. That's why we want to pause and kind of like take a minute to breathe. Avoid doing false promises or committing to actions you cannot realistically deliver just to calm the other person down. This can like make the situation much worse in the future. This is another big one that people sometimes don't think about. Avoid using jargon or explaining something complex in the moment. This is going to increase the frustration. If there is something that we're trying to get across and it is complicated by nature, try to simplify it as much as you can, using very, very simple words and not a lot of words so that it doesn't increase the frustration that the other person is experiencing. Avoid engaging in power struggles. I mean, I have clinical expertise here because this is for my crisis team, but again, like coming from a place where you are sort of like highlighting even more that power differential. And avoid displaying disinterest, which can also escalate if you kind of like disengage or turn around or just start ignoring the other person. These are some examples. Saying things like calm down. We know that that's not effective. If anyone has said this in their personal life, it will send the other person through the roof. Instead, you can say something like, I can see this is really frustrating for you. I know that this is frustrating. I know that this is difficult, like just acknowledging their emotion. Or like, that's not a big deal. It's not that serious. Like, don't worry about it. for them it is. That's why they're that escalated. So again, we validate the emotion. Like missing that appointment sounds really stressful. Like I get it. I probably would be stressed out too, or like this would stress out a lot of people. And direct commands when they're in like that activation phase, because it can be perceived as a double whammy in the sense of like that loss of control. Some of like the core principles when we communicate, we can use silence. It's okay. We don't have to fill in the moment. Silence can sometimes feel intimidating, and we feel this pressure to have to say something to calm the situation down. But silence can, not ignoring, and there's a difference here. We're not like turning around and being dismissive. We can be present and just allow for a brief pause to slow down the moment. That is the opposite of when we're agitated and the moment is very escalated. So this kind of like brings us back. Eye contact. Don't be staring at something else or on your phone. I mean, these are I feel a little bit obvious, but in that moment, we may feel the urge to disengage. So, keep an appropriate amount of like eye contact. We talked about tone and cadence, facial expressions, and body position. This is one thing that I hadn't mentioned, but it is important. If, let's say, that you're speaking to um, someone younger or someone that is like on the floor for some reason, like it may be that they're so upset that they just like literally sat down on the floor. They're frustrated. It sometimes helps to lower down to their level versus talking down to them, which can feel a lot more intimidating and overwhelming. So if you can be at the same eye level as the other person, like if that person is sitting down on a chair and you're standing up, find another chair to sit down next to them, and that can help a lot. Active listening. One of the best tools for this is using paraphrasing techniques. In essence, it just means repeating back what you heard, but please, please don't do it like a parrot. Like, don't say it exactly with their words. Try to reflect back the meaning of what you're saying. This really helps people feel like you are listening to them, because you cannot repeat back if you're not paying attention. You cannot repeat back if you're not trying to get the gist of the message that they're trying to convey. So if someone is saying like, I feel like no one understands me or no one is listening to me, paraphrasing would be like, it sounds like you feel isolated and very unheard right now. You didn't add anything new to the conversation. You didn't provide solutions. All you did was reflect that you get them. You get them in that moment and you understand them and you're empathizing with what they're experiencing. So believe it or not, sometimes our default is to either try to argue to defend ourselves or to try to over explain, when it's a lot more effective if we can just repeat back what they're telling us for a second and be like, I hear you saying this. We already talked about silence and reflection. So allowing for moments of pause to slow down the moment. And then the other one, that this is where, as I was saying, sometimes we get a little bit stuck, is acknowledging and normalizing emotions. This means recognizing what they're feeling and not necessarily saying you're right. So it can sound something like, it makes sense that you're feeling overwhelmed with everything that's happening, or I can see why you're so upset right now. And giving that validity to their feeling versus that shaming of their feeling. Because usually when we respond with anger, it signals that we're telling the other person, I don't agree with what you're feeling right now, or it's inappropriate, or you should stop it, versus like, I get it. I get that you're very upset right now. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we agree with what they are doing or saying in that moment. Okay, super quick pause. I know I can go on and on and on. So before we jump into the third skill, quick thoughts.
I think, so we're approaching the end of our meeting, and so some people are hopping off, but if you're all right, we can continue and share the recording afterwards, if that's all right.
Oh, sorry, I hadn't even noticed the time. I
That's all
don't know
right.
why I was thinking, again, I usually do this in 2 hours. I was thinking, oh, we still have 30 minutes. Um, so what we can do, and I'm so sorry, there was so much that I wanted to explain. I apologize for not keeping better track of the time. Um, I can go super quick, read the two skills that are left, and then if you all have any questions, and if we do want to finish, I'm happy to like reschedule what's left over for another time. I'm sorry about the time.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
people are responding really well to it, but I think that's good. We can finish the skills and then we can follow up with a follow-up discussion.
Okay, perfect. So
Thank you.
yes, so sorry. So like number 3 is just trying to reduce overload and demand on that person. And let me see. Just gonna skip through that. And then number 4 would be like talking about the boundaries and the limit if it is very escalated. So yeah, I'm just gonna leave it there.
Well, that's wonderful. I really appreciate all of your time and just trying to accommodate our like compressed schedule. We will invite you back just to have a little discussion. If you want to send that worksheet over, we can send it with the recording to the MAC members, and then we can dedicate some time to one of our upcoming meetings to kind of circle back and just kind of give responses to like what you gave. Does that work?
Yeah, that would be perfect. Yes,
Wonderful.
I would love to hear all of your thoughts. So if we can create a little bit of time for that, that would be
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Just again, like there's a ton of positive comments in the chat, and this is really helpful. I think that some of the folks on this meeting might not necessarily get exposed to like this type of training, so that's why they had requested it. So just thank you again, Jessica, for your time, and we will invite you to an upcoming meeting. I'll follow up via email, and we'll share this recording.
Perfect. Thank you, Angel.
Thank
you,
you all.
everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.